everyone, and welcome back to Ladies in Red. Phoebe here with Kristen and Sydney, and we just want to thank you guys for tuning in again. To start things off, there's a update of women's sports news that I was reading the other day. Actually, women's football in England, so soccer as we call it here in the States. They just had another monumental stride, with that being that two of the major sports broadcasting companies over there, Sky Sports and BBC, they signed a deal to spend 24 million pounds in investing towards broadcasting and giving women sports coverage within the next 3 years. So obviously this is a huge step, as we talked about in previous episodes, kind of the lack of coverage of women's sports, and it's just one of the steps in the right direction. So it's really cool to see this headline. It kind of was a turning point after the 2019 World Cup, especially with the success that the US team was doing. And there's been a few other attempts to invest and increase the coverage of women's sports, specifically women's soccer, professional soccer. But this is by far the record-breaking one with 24 million pounds. And what this will be, it will just make women's games more prominent. And the facts are that there's going to be now 44 live games on Sky Sports and 18 on BBC, which is much more than before. So it's really cool to see these big companies investing in women's sports. It's definitely a good sense of change that we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. And this just makes me super excited because we always talk about how investing in equality, and this is like the perfect example of investing in female athletics and everything like that. And in today's episode, we are going to be featuring a special guest, Dr. Michele Ford, who is a professor at Dickinson College. She teaches psychology, clinical and counseling related courses such as psychopathology, human sexuality, and both research methods and seminar in counseling psychology. So super interesting. And yeah, she's definitely going to be a great resource for today's episode.
Yeah, she's going to be really cool to listen to, especially because we're going to bring more of like the sciencey side of it, which would be super interesting and fun to learn about. Her clinical interests also include disordered eating, which we've talked about, sexual and reproductive trauma, and depression and anxiety in adults and adolescents, which is why she's a great guest for Ladies in Red, because we have discussed a variety of these topics related to female athletes and how sports affect each of these areas. And we know she'll provide a lot of meaningful insight on these topics. So it'll definitely be a fun episode.
Yeah, definitely be really cool to kind of hear the fact space, the like we said, the sciencey side of it per se, for lack of better terms, just because we all experience various troubles with sports, as we've talked about, at certain levels. So it'll be really cool to hear the psychology side of it.
And now it's time for our Spoon sponsorship. Why cut your portions down? When you are hungry, you want something that is filling and delicious, right? Well, Spoon's Cafe believes in cutting the chemicals, not the portions. Located at 57 West Pomfret Street in downtown Carlisle, Spoon's offers great sandwiches, salads, and soups that are tasty, good for you, and will fill you right up. Stop cutting down the size of your lunch and instead get a delicious lunch today at Spoon's Cafe. Open 6 days a week, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Spoon's is the perfect spot to enjoy a great tasting lunch today.
And welcome back, everyone. As we mentioned before, we'll be talking with Professor Ford today. She's, again, a lecturer at Dickinson and a licensed psychologist. We mentioned her clinical interests previously, but just again, some of those include disordered eating, depression, anxiety, and sexual and reproductive trauma. So we're really excited to have her on today to talk a little bit more about like the athletic side of things and how all that kind of comes into play together.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I guess, we've talked a lot about sports psychology in the past, but obviously us three aren't super educated on like the science side behind it. So I think one question we have is just what's the difference between going to therapy and sports psychology, and how can athletes benefit from sports psychology?
Yeah, so I feel like what people tend to know about psychology is like clinical psychology, which is the treatment of mental illness. And there's another field in psychology called counseling psychology, which is very closely connected to clinical, but focuses more kind of on the wellness side of things. And sports psychology actually kind of came out of counseling psychology. And so the way that sports psychology is different is that it tends to focus more sort of on the doing better, right? The sort of promoting wellness side of things than necessarily on the treating illness side of things. So a sports psychologist comes in to help kind of maximize performance in that way. If there is like some mental illness or symptoms of a mental illness at play, they can certainly address that as well. And that's only going to help the performance enhancement. But a sports psychologist comes at it from the sort of maximizing kind of the strengths that are already present. I feel like once we talk about psychologists coming in, people get nervous, right? But the goal is to be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely seems like it's since it is specified with sports that you probably deal with more like example based and then be able to improve, like you said, it's based on like the betterment and stuff. So
Mhm.
just it could be from personal experience or just in general, do you think that there is a certain factor in sports that kind of attributes most people to either going to sports a psychologist or just having poor mental health? Like would it be any, maybe the time constraints, the physical assertion, pressure? Is there any kind of like rhyme or reason to having the need to go and talk to a sports psychologist, I guess?
Mhm. I think sports psychologists can help at any stage of athletic performance, right? Going to see one would be someone just wants to do better at their sport. And it's one thing to kind of go to practice and do the physical part of your sport. But sometimes at practice, we're not always working on the mental part of the sport. And so the psychologist is there to sort of help clear your head, help train you to focus, help you to use visualization skills like in an effective way. So I know some coaches definitely like use visualization in their practice, but you actually really have to like focus and pay attention when you're doing it to maximize those benefits. So I think someone might go see a sports psychologist to say, I get that I can actually do the physical components of my sport and I can do them well, but something goes on up here, right, that gets in the way of me sort of pulling it all together to kind of maximize that mind-body connection, right? So you focus on the body a lot when you're training and you're conditioning and everything else, but the sports psychologist helps with like the mental focus that you need to really sort of maximize performance.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've tried to talk about like the more mental side of things, and like one of those was burnout, which we talked about a couple episodes ago, and how like the pandemic obviously hasn't helped with that because we haven't been able to compete as often. And we learned that females are more susceptible to burnout than male athletes. And then we were just wondering if this was true and if you could elaborate on this more and why it's so common.
Yeah, I actually saw your podcast on burnout, and I feel like burnout's kind of a hot topic in general, definitely in psychology, but I feel like just in the world because everybody's burned out during the pandemic at this point. In general, women in general are at higher risk for burnout. So I'm not really surprised, right, that women athletes are at higher risk for burnout. And I think, as women, we just tend to kind of take more on sometimes. Like we take on the concerns of our teammates, we take on the concerns of the people closest to us. We are fighting hard, right, to do well in school and to be recognized in lots of different ways. And then as a female athlete, you're fighting hard to do well in your sport so you can sort of be recognized for what you're doing, but also, for women's sports to be recognized at the level that's equal to men's sports as well, right? So I feel like the more mountains we have to climb, just the more effort we have to put in. And the more effort we have to put in, the more self-care we have to do to make sure that we can kind of continually sort of be putting the effort back in. And if we're not balancing out effort with sort of taking care of ourselves, then it's a condition sort of ripe for burnout. And we know that burnout is actually higher in people who are sort of highly motivated to achieve. And athletes, particularly who have made it to a higher level in their sport, are clearly like innately sort of have higher motivation to achieve. So I think there's just like personality factors at play. I think there's sports related factors at play, and then there's life related factors at play that kind of contribute to that. So the more stressors we put on someone, the more likely they are to burn out if they're trying to sort of achieve everywhere, and not really taking a step back to take care of themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you mentioned, our episode about burnout kind of reiterates that fact that, especially female athletes, like you said, are always taking on more things. And I know I'm someone who's really highly motivated and almost like a perfectionist. So if something doesn't go wrong, or if I don't meet a goal, I'm like almost think I failed. So I was just wondering, like, what are some healthy ways for athletes, like such as us, to set goals for ourselves without becoming burnout and fearing failure?
I mean, I think just the idea of thinking like, hey, maybe I don't need to put all of myself in this all the time is a good way to be thinking about it. And then thinking about, how do I balance things out in my life? Because especially when you're in season, your life is pretty much your season, right? But you also have to take time to sort of balance out what's going on in your students. So you have to do your papers and your exams and all those sorts of things. And so, I mean, I'm going to give the typical psychologist answer here, which is all about boundary setting, right? So finding effective ways to say, okay, I need to shift from being an athlete right now to being a student, but then also saying I need to shift to like being a person, right? An actual person who needs friends and connection, and maybe needs to reach out to family, needs to do some things that are like just enjoyable for the sake of being enjoyable and not for the sake of having accomplishment. But then I think, you know, where your sport is concerned, then you do kind of the standard sort of goal setting stuff. So we talk about appropriate goal setting. We talk about sort of using the SMART model, which is you make specific goals, right? You make measurable goals, things that are achievable, things that are relevant for what you're doing, and things that actually, you know, are attainable and what's going on. And that they're kind of time limited in that way, so that you can say, all right, for the next week or two, I'm going to focus on this, and this is kind of how I'm going to do it. And I want to do, you know, 3 visualization practices in 1 week. Right? And I'm going to try to spend 5 minutes a day doing these 3 visualization practices, so that you can then at the end of the week feel like, okay, well, I achieved something. This is what I said I was going to do. It was specific. It was measurable. It was something that you could incorporate. It's 15 minutes in your week. And then you could feel like, okay, right, I did a little extra for myself. I did a little extra for my sport. And I took some time, right, to do something that was important to me.
Yeah, so I feel like with the visualization process, I know my coach has tried to do that, and we have done that. And we do yoga and like meditation, like things like that. But on the coaching aspect of it, I feel like a lot of times it would be really beneficial for them to enact that in practices and stuff like that. And I know a lot of coaches have, I feel like that trend is going that way. Do you agree with like that is something that can stem from the coach and the team rather than always having to be like kind of like an individual on your own thing?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I feel like when I was talked to some student athletes who say, "Oh yeah, my coach does this in practice and I really like it and it's really helpful and it gets me kind of in the mindset to practice." So we know that with visualization, you know, our brain sort of, it's almost like our body's doing it if our brain's kind of going through the motions, but it's sort of like what I mentioned earlier. It requires actually a lot of focus. And so you can sort of do it halfway and sort of be like, yeah, like I'm picturing myself doing this. But we see the most effect when you're actually sitting there, like fully concentrating as if you are actually in the moment. And then it's almost like practice without doing all the physical strain on your body. So, I mean, I'm always preaching sort of the visualization technique before in any situation, right? Going into an exam. My kids will tell you, I'm always like, visualize you doing like a good job at this. And I get the standard eye roll where that's concerned, but I know that it actually works for that to happen. And so I'm 100% on the visualization train. Yeah.
Yeah, I know for like in one of my Buddhism classes, and even like I'm taking health psychology with Professor Gordina right now. And for both of those, we had to do like some sort of like 10-minute meditation kind of thing. And I know that I did them on separate days. And for the Buddhism one, it was definitely a lot more difficult to like concentrate and kind of just like relax, sit there, because I had like a busy day and like I had a lot of homework and stuff to do. But then when I did it for my health psych class, I didn't have as busy of a day, and I don't even think I had practice, and it was so much easier to like get in the right mindset and be able to relax completely. So that was interesting to see.
And the benefits of just a 10-minute kind of like just taking time to sort of relax are huge. So they last far longer than 10 minutes. And even if you can't fully get into it, you still get the benefits of it. But with practice and the more often you do it, it's easier to sort of kind of make that shift and automatically get into it. And your body just reaps so many benefits from doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely as student athletes, we have this like mindset that we always have to keep going, grinding. And I think that's what kind of contributes to, you know, anxiety and not even thinking you have time to visualize. And I think one major thing is just performance anxiety. And I know we've talked about that before. It's just a major issue in athletics that many people have dealt with, but don't even want to admit to dealing with. So could you elaborate on that? And do you have any tips for performance anxiety on high competition days, like game days, meet days, whatever it may be?
Well, yeah, I feel like, especially when you're kind of under pressure to perform in so many areas of your life. So when you're a student, you're performing in the classroom, you're performing in whatever sport you're playing. And then these all sort of compile, right? They just sort of kind of come down on you in this one big heap. And it feels like if I'm not doing well in one area, then I'm suffering in another area, and it can get out of control really quickly. But I often talk about this sort of performance anxiety. So sports psychology sort of deals in sort of managing some of these things. You want some of it, right? You want to have that sort of pumped up feeling. And I think when we start talking about it as anxiety, it's sort of like this negative thing, right? Anxiety is a bad thing and anxiety gets in the way. But I think if we can sort of reframe it a little bit and think about, okay, this is me getting pumped up because this is actually going to maximize my performance. So if we can sort of think about it as not necessarily a bad thing, but actually a good thing that's going to help you perform better, that's one way. And the second part is sort of managing it, right? So we don't want it to get out of control so that it actually takes away from your performance. And the way that we keep things from getting out of control is to make sure that we're sort of taking care of other things in our life. So, you know, the sort of the standard things that I talk about with clients in therapy: are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating right? Like, are you kind of taking care of yourself in the ways that you need to? Because if you're not, that anxiety is going to get out of control really quickly, and it's not going to be something that's helpful. It's going to be something that sort of takes away from what's going on. I mean, we know that athletes tend to not sleep well before they're going to compete anyways, right? So the idea is not to just be like, I'm going to sleep really well the night before my game, but I'm going to sleep really well like a couple days up to it, so that if I have a bit of a deficit the night before, then I'm still kind of in a good place to sort of maximize benefits. So I think of it in terms of mentally kind of managing it and changing your self-talk so that it's not negative. But then I also think about physically. Clearly, you've done all the training and things you need to do, like your coaches have prepped you for that. So it's more about sort of taking care of the basics for you: sleeping right, eating right, making sure you've got, you know, most of your other things sort of taken care of, so you can mentally leave them when you step out onto the field. And, you know, you can say, you know what, I'll worry about that later, because right now I need to be focused here. So sort of taking care of the other parts of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I know, like, you've worked with the softball team, and I know that like my coach has said many times, like, control the controllables, and like whatever you can't control, like trying to not let that get to you. It's like super hard not to, but yeah, because obviously we'll be able to play more relaxed and stuff like that. So I do think like hearing that from a coach definitely helps, because it's like if you go out on the field and you make an error or you strike out at the plate, like it's not as tense as like if you were to do so and then a coach would start screaming at you. Like obviously it's going to impact you differently. So
yeah, and I think that's where the mental focus comes in, right? It's sort of like, okay, I need to leave that, right? That's done, it's over with, I need to leave it, and I'll come back to it later, maybe after the game, and revisit then. But right now it's not going to help me to be ruminating about this, right? So I think the same thing, if you have an exam coming up, it's like, well, I can't worry about that right now. So sometimes I think boundaries help in a mental way to saying, this is my focus now, and I'm not going to let anything else come in the way. And being able to sort of set kind of like a mental boundary around it.
Yeah. We've talked about mental health and stuff in the past a lot on various episodes, and we've seen more and more athletes coming out and like saying like it's okay to talk about it. So it's definitely nice to have like that reassurance. And like both men and female athletes are starting to come out like on social media and stuff like that. And it's just becoming more accepted and normalized. How would you counsel an athlete with a recurring mental health condition?
I think one of the things would be to sort of say that this is actually way more normal than you would think it would be. And so the rates in the kind of general population are between 20 and 25%. In the athlete population, it's actually 35%. So I feel like athletes sometimes might assume that they're kind of immune to some of these things because they've done so well in so many areas of their life. But because they have all these added pressures, they're actually at greater risk for things like depression and anxiety. Some sports sort of, trigger eating disorders and things like that, just kind of do more leanness oriented sports, their athletes have sort of a higher risk for eating disorders. And so I would try to sort of take away the stigma from it first and say, look, you're not alone here. And I'm very thankful that so many athletes now are coming out saying that like, I'm really struggling with this stuff because it feels like, okay, I've certainly had several clients who are athletes who have said, oh my gosh, look at this person on social media. Like, this is exactly how I feel. And so then they feel less alone in doing that. And teaching them. So then you use the therapy skills to teach them how to manage whatever it is that they're struggling with and try to put it to the side in the same way that you would do someone who maybe is not struggling with a mental illness, but is still trying to kind of enhance their performance. But I would say you have to treat the mental illness before you can start doing kind of the performance enhancement piece of what's going on. And I feel like athletes are pretty good at conceptualizing, injuries and understanding injuries and how they impact their performance. And so sometimes it's helpful to just think of this as like, this is kind of like an injury right now, right? And you have to treat it and you have to manage it. And once we can kind of get past it, or at least get it under control, then you can focus a little bit more on playing or try to kind of figure out how to manage it while you're also playing, right? So sometimes it's helpful to conceptualize things like in the language that you speak, right? Yeah.
I think we're seeing now, it's kind of nice to see that, definitely like Kristen said, that it's becoming more accepted and more normalized and stuff. And hopefully we're breaking those barriers to get rid of the stigmas. But I think that it always has been equally mental as physical, playing sports and stuff. So it's good to see that now it's becoming more of the norm to accept that and to like know that, I guess, because a lot of times I feel like even myself, like you were like, oh, like in order to be better at my sport, I need to practice, like physically, I need to lift, I need to run. But there's also a mental side of it that is equally as important. And it's something that I feel a lot of people kind of push back and almost don't equal it as a injury as well. Like, and they just kind of are like, oh, like I'm just like in a mood today, or like I'm just feeling this way, it'll go away. So I think it's really important to just bring that out and recognize that we really do need to continue on this stride to acknowledge that it's sports in general are like, you need to practice mentally equally as physically.
Well, and especially at this stage of the game, like clearly you have the physical stuff down, right? So where the improvement tends to happen is mentally. And this is actually where the improvements can happen, I feel like, because even developmentally, this is sort of where your brain is starting to understand how to kind of control emotions and develop this focus. And that's really only going to help you in the rest of your life if you continue to play a sport or not, right? It'll help you at work, it'll help you at home. So these are great skills to have, just for future wellness. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in the individual sense, but also in the sense of like being as a team, like being united as a team. Like I've been on a ton of teams throughout my life, whether it was different sports or different clubs, high school, college, whatever. And I have consistently seen that if the team chemistry is there, if you are open with each other and, all those good characteristics that you want in a good teammate, like if that is there and you are well bonded, like you are going to do better. It's just, I think from personal experience is just proven that when you all are on the same mental page, you can all then be on the same physical page and practice together and be able to succeed. Because you just can't if you're not all there on the same page mentally.
Exactly. And then you can lean on each other when you're struggling. And typically your teammates are the ones who will sort of pick you back up, right? When you're not able to sort of do that for yourself. So I agree 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that too. Just from like being here and in high school, even like I remember my freshman year of high school, we barely won enough games to make it to like our conference playoffs. And then senior year, by the time like we had like a new coach and like we were just more united, we ended up winning the state championship. So it's like, and I would definitely attribute part of that to having a good team chemistry, because if it wasn't for that, I don't think we would have made it that far.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like students constantly talk about how important their teammates are to them. You know, that becomes kind of like a family and sort of this built-in social support. And clearly, you know, teams aren't always like just naturally cohesive, but when it comes together like that, I feel like it becomes a key part of kind of getting someone through school and getting someone through the season and getting someone through something like the pandemic, which is hard because you sort of lost your teams in some ways, right? You kind of, I mean, you're all still there, but you're all there sort of on Zoom and not able to be together like you used to be.
Yeah, and I definitely think that team chemistry can be kind of taught in a sense, meaning that like when I got to college, I felt that the team chemistry was there. I don't think we did some team bonding, but we very much got along, in my opinion, and like it really worked well for us. But in high school, I very much remember my coach. We did so many team bonding things, and we did visualizations together, and we did so many things that almost like college level teams would do, but we were in high school because our coach really wanted to unite us, and we were all so different. There was a ton of us as well. In my class there was like a dozen of us, and we were all coming from like different kind of mindsets for what we wanted out of the game. And I just remember going through all of that team bonding that like it united us, and we ended up then, once we were on that same mental level, we practiced so well. Like it was to a point, like I remember like playing in the game and just like knowing what my teammate was going to do because we were on that same level, and it helped us. We ended up winning the state championship 5-0 my senior year, which is like
Yeah.
super cool for field hockey, like a high scoring game. So I definitely proved that our team proved that once you're there mentally, then you can really work hard and succeed physically.
Well, and it's one thing I feel like to be in the zone individually as an athlete, right? Which is what you sort of go for. But when the whole team is in the zone together, like the sort of the possibilities are kind of endless in that moment. And it's such a great feeling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is, what a feeling.
Yeah, it's a great feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sports are just like 90% mental. And I think like a lot of that, like we're just saying, like getting on the same page and like almost being on the same mental page collectively, it's obviously easier said than done, but when it does happen, like you see so many teams succeeding in that aspect. And I think especially like we were talking about, just the normalization of mental health has definitely contributed to these teams succeeding and choosing to, you know, take 10 minutes less of practicing and like conditioning to do something mental health related, and it will really go a long way, I think.
It will, which is amazing because when everything comes together, it feels like magic, right? It feels like this sort of magically happened. But in reality, it's all of these things that you've been working on that just kind of come together finally. And there's not as much magic to it. It's just kind of putting all the pieces there. And then all of a sudden they just kind of click. So yeah, it's kind of incorporating this mental part.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sitting down to talk with us. I
Sure.
thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope
Yeah, me too.
everyone listening did as well. So just thank you again. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
Yeah.
All right. What an awesome conversation that was. I definitely got a lot from it, and I hope everyone else did. So thanks again for tuning into Ladies in Red. We're going to really dive deep into this topic more within the next episode or two. So stay tuned for some fun topics and some important topics coming up in the future. So everyone, thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon.